Welcome back, everybody. In this video, we're going to continue our work on immediate inferences. We're going to review the Venn diagrams for categorical propositions and immediate inferences and do a little bit more practice on the types of inference that we learned in the last video, that is conversion, obversion, and contraposition. So let's have a look here. If you recall from last time, we discussed the placement of our immediate inferences on the Venn diagram. Now, on the traditional interpretation of logic, recall that we have this issue of existential import, and what that means is the factual existence of universal class terms is taken to be an issue. And to designate the existence of the universals, we are going to use in our Venn diagrams a circled X to denote the reality, as it were, the existence of at least one member of the universal class. So on our universals, we use shading in region 1 to designate for the universal affirmative that there is nothing out there is nothing that belongs to the subject group that is not also included in the predicate group. That in and of itself is not different from the modern interpretation, but we include a circled X here in region 2 to designate that there at least is one member of the subject group that really does exist and overlaps with the predicate group. Again, for our E propositions, our universal negatives, no S or P, we have shading in region 2 that indicates that there is nothing that is out there. There's nothing in that area of overlap of the subject class and the predicate class. However, the distinguishing feature from the modern interpretation is the usage of two circled X's, one in region 1 in the subject group and one in the predicate group to designate that there is at least one member of the subject that exists and one member of the predicate that exists as well. Now, if you go down to the lower half on the Venn diagram, the particular categories are exactly the same as the modern interpretation. For the I proposition, some S or P, we use an X without a circle, just an X to be clear, in region 2 to indicate that there really is at least one member of the subject group that is also a member of the predicate group. And for the O proposition, our particular negatives, we're going to use an X in region 1. So it is out there in S, and it is definitely excluded from the predicate class. Okay. Hopefully by now you have gotten familiar with the Venn diagrams and the difference between traditional and modern. So let's just have a look at how this looks on the modern interpretation. Again, with the modern interpretation, we don't have the issue of existential import for universals, so we don't take there to be existence for universals. So we're not going to use circled X's for the universals. We're just going to use shading in region 1 for A propositions and shading in region 2 for universal negative propositions. The particulars are exactly the same with the traditional. We use X in region 2 for particular affirmative and an X in region 1 for particular negatives. So be aware of that distinction. I think the modern interpretation is more elegant and leaner in a way than the traditional interpretation, but there are at times more things we can do on the traditional interpretation. Okay, so last time we sort of walked through the immediate inferences as they appear on the Venn diagram. Conversion, if you recall, is an immediate inference we can make with a single sentence if it's standard form categorical proposition. So conversion is the switching of subject and predicate classes for any standard form categorical proposition. And these are the Venn diagrams for all converted forms. So refer back to this on page 202 regularly, refer back to it early and often, and you can see pretty much right away from the Venn diagrams which propositions allow us to validly convert on the modern interpretation. The valid ones are the ones that are logically equivalent. In other words, the ones that yield an identical Venn diagram. So we have logical equivalence for the E propositions, universal negatives, no S or P becomes no PRS. That is a valid inference. These are logically equivalent. And for our I propositions, we have logical equivalents. Some S are P, the converse is some P are S, and we do see logical equivalents there. So I propositions can be validly converted. Note that we cannot validly convert on the modern interpretation A propositions. All S are P becomes all P are S. That is not a valid inference on the modern interpretation. However, on the traditional interpretation, we are allowed to limit the universal by bringing it down on the square of opposition to the I proposition and then applying conversion to the corresponding particular proposition. But that move is not allowed on the modern interpretation because we do not presuppose the existence of a universal class term. And notice that O propositions are always invalid when it comes to conversion on the Venn diagram. Some S are not P cannot validly be converted into some P are not S. So O is always invalid. With obversion, remember the moves that we have to make in order to make that inference. We begin with any standard form categorical proposition, and in order to find the obverse for the initiating obverten, we first change the quality of the proposition, and then we add a complement designated with the word non to the predicate term of the sentence. And notice that the good thing for obversion is that it is valid for all four types of categories. All S are P is a proposition, and its obverse becomes no S are non-P. These are logically equivalent. The E proposition, no S or P, becomes an A proposition, all S are non-P. These are logically equivalent, so this is valid. Some S or P becomes some S are not non-P. These are valid. This is a valid inference. These are logically equivalent as well. The O proposition, some S are not P. The obverse is some S are non-P. And this is a valid, logically equivalent inference. So obversion is a very flexible, forgiving kind of inference, and it works every time as long as you are making the transformation of the quality and the addition of the complement in the correct way. Last but not least, we have contraposition. The Venn diagrams for this, by the way, are on page 204 of the Baronet book. If you recall, contraposition is another inference that has a few steps. The first step is to switch subject and predicate once again, and then to add the complements for both the predicate class term and the subject class term. So it's kind of like conversion, but with an additional step. And to try to look over the Venn diagram here and see for yourself which ones are validly contraposable. We can see that the A proposition is a valid contraposition. All S are P becomes all non-P are non-S. I know that's a very clunky resulting sentence, but these are logically equivalent. A propositions are validly contraposed. The E proposition, unfortunately, is not validly contraposed. No S or P becomes no non-P are non-S. And as we can see in the shading in region 4 on the diagram, this is not logically equivalent to the E proposition, so this is not a valid inference. For the particular I, some S or P, the contrapositive is some non-P are non-S, and we can see that the X, which began in region 2 in the area of overlap of S and P, is now in region 4. So these are not logically equivalent, and thus contraposition is not a valid inference for I propositions. For O propositions, we begin some S not P with X in region 1 again, and the transformed contrapositive is some non-P are not non-S. And even though this sentence may sound very different from some S are not P, we do still have an X in region 1 in the subject group outside of the P group, so this is logically equivalent. The O proposition is validly contraposed. So get in the habit of writing these down and memorizing which inferences are valid and which are not valid. And the Venn diagram should be referred back to regularly as you're doing that to reinforce which ones are valid and logically equivalent. Okay, let's do a little practice with some of our moves here, with some of our immediate inferences. The only way to really learn this stuff is to try to find the inferences for categorical sentences, for propositions. So for the following, please find the converse, the obverse, and the contrapositive on the modern interpretation. So write the transformed sentence and try to determine whether or not the inference is valid or not. So do that for these following sentences. First, all commodity traders are gamblers who risk sudden disaster. Some organ transplants are not simple operations. And 3, some artistic people are eccentric people. So for each of the following, write down the converse, the obverse, the contrapositive, and determine whether or not they're valid, each one of those inferences. Let's begin with the first one. All commodity traders are gamblers who risk sudden disaster. The first thing you should really be doing with these categorical propositions is just to locate and identify what category of proposition this is, right? That'll allow us to make the move that we need to generate the inference and to determine validity. All commodity traders are gamblers who risk sudden disaster. This sounds like an A proposition to me, a universal affirmative, right? We have our P group with commodity traders. We have the affirmative copula R, and then we have our predicate group, gamblers who risk sudden disaster. So note that the predicate class term can be long, right? We can string together a bundle of words here, but it still kind of constitutes a single type of entity, right? All right, so we have an A proposition here. So try to find the converse. How do we do that? What's the step that we have to do to find converse? And once you've found the converse, determine if it's valid or invalid. Okay, this is what the converse looks like. All gamblers who risk sudden disaster are commodity traders, right? We have switched the S and P, where S is really commodity traders and P is gamblers who risk sudden disaster. So we flip-flopped them. And if you recall from the Venn diagrams, converse is invalid on the modern interpretation. If this were the traditional or Aristotelian interpretation of logic, we could validly find the converse through a process of limitation where we transform the A proposition into its corresponding I proposition, but that isn't allowed on the modern interpretation because of the issue of existential import. So this is an invalid immediate inference. So when I say you can't make this move, that's not to say you can't write down what the inference is here. We can literally write down the resulting sentence with the subject and the predicate reversed. But what is meant is that the inference itself is not a valid move. We can't kind of claim with any sense of truth that all gamblers who risk sudden disaster are commodity traders. So at the level of inference, this is not permitted, even though we can, quite literally semantically define the resulted, the generated sentence. Okay. So now think about the obverse. How do we find the obverse for any categorical proposition or for an A proposition? There's 2 steps.